This video is about a failed spin-off of The Fall Guy. To be clear, we're not talking about the Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt movie. That's not a spin-off. It's a feature film version of an old TV show.
Well, I'm not the kind.
We're going to look at an unsuccessful spin-off that was attempted back in 1982. But as long as we're on the subject of cinematic adaptations, The Fall Guy is an odd choice for a multi-million-dollar movie. Sure, a lot of intellectual properties from the 80s have been transformed into profitable content like straw into gold. The past is a natural resource being strip-mined for nostalgia. But The Fall Guy doesn't really have the massive appeal of some fan favorites from that era. It's no Ghostbusters or Miami Vice. Making a Fall Guy movie is like making a feature film reboot of Scarecrow and Mrs. King. But the fact is, somebody owns the rights, and they don't care if it's beloved or not. This is how we end up with projects like Top Cat the movie, which must have made money because there's a sequel. Today's average moviegoer might not even know that The Fall Guy is based on a TV show, but this movie is giving them a chance to meet the unknown stuntman. And it's a chance for The Fall Guy to make a comeback. That's the theme of today's video, how Lee Majors got another chance, and how his show gave a second chance to Pat McCormick and Paul Williams, one of the weirdest comedy duos of the 80s. And their big shot at a TV show is all part of Behind the Backdoor Pilot, The Fall Guy. For as long as I can remember, Lee Majors has always been a pop culture icon.
It's Lee Majors!
F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that there are no second acts in American lives. But guys like Lee Majors and Ted Danson make Fitzgerald eat those words.
Wow.
Lee Majors got his start in the 60s doing TV westerns like The Big Valley. In the 70s, he became a pop culture hero as the $6 Million Man. Very few actors get a hit TV show, let alone two hit shows spanning over multiple decades. In the 80s, Lee Majors had a chance for a hat trick with The Fall Guy. Not only did he star in this new show, he sang the iconic theme song.
Cause I'm the unknown stuntman that makes Eastwood look so fine.
In some ways, The Fall Guy is having a dialogue with the $6 Million Man. Cyber-enhanced Steve Austin was capable of super speed, impossible stunts, and giant leaps. The guy even fought Bigfoot. But The Fall Guy features an average dude who takes a beating, both on camera and off. Here's what led up to The Fall Guy. The 1970s was a renaissance period for stunts, thanks to the popularity of daredevils like Evel Knievel. 1975's Rollerball was one of the first movies to give an on-screen credit to stunt performers. Meanwhile, you had feature films about stuntmen, including Burt Reynolds' Hooper.
I hate it when directors slobber all over me like that.
And thought-provoking cinema like The Stuntman, which was nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Ride the ride of the century on Eli's Killer Crane.
Don't forget Robert Forster was in a B-movie thriller titled Stunts. And stuntman Grant Page is the star of this incredible cult oddity.
Stunt rock. The ultimate rush.
Highly recommended. So by 1981, there was a new awareness and appreciation for the stunt artist. Combine that with the star power of the $6 Million Man, and it's no surprise that The Fall Guy ran for 5 seasons. It had its own line of toys, a board game, a comic strip, and a Commodore 64 video game. Yes, The Fall Guy had everything except a spin-off. We'll get to that in a minute. Lee Majors played Colt Seavers. This guy was ahead of his time. He worked as a stuntman and a bounty hunter. And this was decades before everyone was using the phrase side hustle.
So these are like hustlers, and it's kind of cool. It's like, I think it's something to admire.
The Fall Guy is joined by his naive nephew, Howie, and Colt's beautiful protege, Jody, who does stunts for the leading ladies. Except in the first episode where Colt personally performs a driving stunt as Farrah Fawcett.
That was a great stunt, Cole.
Anything for my leading lady.
It's kind of ironic. The Fall Guy is a show about glorifying the stuntman, and the stuntman is played by Lee Majors, who has a stuntman. Each episode would feature a crime-fighting adventure and at least one big Hollywood stunt. That was the winning formula for each episode of The Fall Guy. The same way every episode of The Incredible Hulk would feature a Hulk out, or each episode of Knight Rider would feature a turbo boost. Incidentally, Knight Rider and The Fall Guy were created by the same man, Glenn Larson. He was an insanely prolific writer who created shows like Magnum P.I., Quincy, Manimal, Automan, and Battlestar Galactica. Glenn Larson belongs on the Mount Rushmore of showrunners from the 80s alongside Stephen Bochco, Michael Mann, and Stephen J. Cannell. And the same way Colt Seavers was working a side hustle, Glenn Larson was always developing other TV shows.
It's something to admire.
So it should come as no surprise that he tried to launch a new series with a backdoor pilot episode during season 2 of The Fall Guy. How Do I Kill Thee, Let Me Count the Ways is about the Fall Guy turning down a job and passing it along to a pair of private detectives.
You know, we always appreciate it when you throw us a little work.
Meet Rooster Steele and Sweets McBride. This odd couple is played by two B-level celebrities from the 70s. Paul Williams and Pat McCormick were the Schwarzenegger and DeVito of their day. And now here they were on an episode of The Fall Guy.
Then maybe you can explain how we got here.
Paul Williams was a singer-songwriter who adored being on camera. He'd appear on everything from The Muppet Show to The Brady Bunch Hour.
I'm in love with you.
You're what? He's what?
Paul Williams was such a staple of 70s TV that he's one of the judges when Homer Simpson got gonged on The Gong Show. Plus, Paul Williams was in a bunch of cult movies like The Loved One.
It's a modified C7 Wildcat single-stage 1H turbo with a 4G thrust.
It is, huh?
Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, and the final sequel in the original Planet of the Apes saga.
Ape has never killed ape.
He once went on The Tonight Show in full ape makeup.
This is 7 months of nothing but banana daiquiris.
Paul Williams had been a guest on The Tonight Show 48 times. And that must have been where he first met Pat McCormick. McCormick was a writer on The Tonight Show where he was known for his outrageous sense of humor. He famously crashed a monologue completely naked. Plus, he'd show up in all kinds of movies like Robert Altman dramedies, and a comedic behind-the-scenes dramatization about the making of The Wizard of Oz. Under the Rainbow is another example of McCormick calling attention to his massive size.
This looks like an aerial view of an unemployment line.
So Paul Williams was real-life friends with Pat McCormick, but you'll never guess who decided these two should team up on camera. You give up? Here's the answer.
Burt Reynolds.
Yes, Burt Reynolds was at The Tonight Show when he saw Paul Williams next to Pat McCormick and thought they looked hilarious.
We wanted a look that was so funny. I mean, you just looked at him and laughed.
So he cast them as a father and son duo in Smokey and the Bandit.
I remember the first shot. I lifted the hat up, and it was the most visceral laugh I've ever had, the most real laugh.
They don't have a lot of screen time, but they sure do make a lasting impression. Now, the first Smokey and the Bandit was huge. It was the second highest grossing film of 1977.
What the hell is the world coming to?
Second only to Star Wars.
Don't get technical with me.
So now Paul Williams and Pat McCormick had become bona fide movie stars. And Glenn Larson was ready to have them show up in an episode of The Fall Guy to launch their own series. But wait, there's something you should know. This was maybe the biggest stunt ever attempted on The Fall Guy. Most of the time when you watch a backdoor pilot episode, you meet characters we've never seen before. But in the case of Rooster Steele and Sweets McBride, this was not their first rodeo. Their episode of The Fall Guy aired on December 1st, 1982. 3.5 months earlier, those same characters starred in a made-for-TV movie called Rooster. Which means How Do I Kill Thee is no ordinary backdoor pilot. It's a second chance for these bumbling detectives. It's a Hail Mary at getting a show picked up, which obviously didn't happen with the TV movie. So let's start with that movie. The idea came from the mind of Paul Williams.
I find that generally your brains triumph over brawn.
Williams told the Boston Globe he got the idea because he was sick of traveling on the road. I wanted to stay home and watch my newborn son outgrow me. Rooster was co-written by Paul Williams and Glenn Larson, making this the only time a Grammy winner co-wrote a screenplay with the creator of Battlestar Galactica. I also get the impression that Pat McCormick might have added a few jokes.
Nice to see you, Miss Richter. You certainly have a nice spread.
Once a joke writer, always a joke writer. Paul Williams plays Rooster, a brainy detective.
Ah, that's Rooster. He's a police psychologist. You know, a shrink.
And then there's Sweets McBride, a former police officer turned insurance company investigator. At first, they do not like each other, but they put aside their differences to track down a serial arsonist. Rooster uses techno gadgets to record voices and determine whether or not a suspect is lying.
You see, Bradyman was lying through his teeth.
And Sweets is really big. The movie has plenty of action, lots of comedy.
What are you trying to do, change his oil?
Even some drama.
The doctor said it's critical.
Pat McCormick enjoys cracking jokes, but he's a little uneasy during the dramatic scenes.
I had a partner shot out from under me on the 4th of July. Almost 3 years ago to the day.
More than anything else, the script is packed with exposition.
Get in, I'll tell you why.
And driving around. So much driving around. Often while delivering more exposition.
3 men dead. No drugs found. No one in custody. It happens. It happens easiest when someone on the inside tells someone on the outside not to be there.
Or listing the street names for cocaine.
Otherwise known as seed, toot, snow, blow, flake.
Happy dust, nose candy, Peruvian lady, white girl.
Just like Deadpool and Blind Owl.
Even snowboarding?
Even disco dust.
White girl interrupter?
Even forest bump.
The movie really leans into the pair's cartoony appearance. And judging by their car, you'd think Rooster was made by Hanna-Barbera. The movie features a lot of jokes about their size difference.
You're a giant, for God's sakes. Anything that could hurt you is extinct.
He looks like a satellite view of a human being.
He runs like a rhino in love.
How'd you like to be the first munchkin in space?
For the record, Paul Williams stands at 5'2" and Pat McCormick is 6'7". Or, to quote the Bandit,
it must be a bitch getting a size 68 extra fat and a 12 dwarf.
The telefilm was directed by Russ Mayberry. His credits include Kojak, McCloud, Barnaby Jones, and Beretta. No wonder Rooster feels like a generic 70s crime show. But keep in mind, it was made in 1982. Maybe that's why Rooster didn't go to series. It felt like an artifact from a previous decade, starring a guy who is very 70s. The movie is packed with similar kinds of guest stars. There are special appearances by Marie Osmond, John Saxon, William Daniels, who would later reteam with Glenn Larson as the voice of Kit, Charlie Callis, Ed Lauer, and members of the Los Angeles Dodgers. That's a lot of guest stars. It's almost as if the producers didn't feel confident in Paul and Pat's star power.
We resent that implication.
We don't deny it.
We resent it anyway.
And there's still more cameos. Look, there's Severn Darden, who also starred in Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
Well, there it is. Ape City.
Making this an unofficial reunion. This movie is like an episode of The Drew Barrymore Show. There's 2 more guest stars we have to mention, Eddie Albert and Delta Burke. They had both appeared in the first episode of The Fall Guy. And we should note there's one other person who was also in the Fall Guy pilot. Paul Williams played himself on The Fall Guy. His scenes were deleted from the home video release, presumably to avoid expensive music licensing. But look, in this one scene, you can still see him in the background, which means the Fall Guy universe is home to both Paul Williams and Rooster Steele. Kind of like that episode of The Honeymooners where Alice Cramden meets Jackie Gleason.
Oh, Mr. Gleason, I'm so glad you came. I'm Alice Cramden.
Oh, hi.
And you know who else met Jackie Gleason?
I'd like to kick your ass. You can't kick that high. cricket crutch.
Paul Williams told the Boston Globe that he was good friends with Lee Majors. So when Williams booked the Fall Guy pilot, he pitched Rooster to Glenn Larson. And that's how this movie got made. Glenn Larson hired the same director, got some of the same guest stars, and hoped it would become a hit series just like The Fall Guy. You don't have to be a TV historian to know it didn't work. Rooster did not become a series. But this wasn't the end of the road for Rooster Sweets and their giant dog. Did I mention the movie ends with them inheriting a big dog?
Sweet!
15 weeks after the debut of their pilot movie, the characters returned for an episode of The Fall Guy, How Do I Kill Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. The biggest difference between the movie and this backdoor pilot? Paul Williams dyed his mustache. Yeah, that's why the series didn't get picked up the first time. His mustache was too damn blonde. Why does that dyed mustache look so familiar? Oh, right. Anyway, a voiceover introduces the characters as colleagues of the Fall Guy.
When you work for the courts on the side, you're bound to have an unusual collection of friends. Brewster Steele and Sweets McBride fit that description.
The private eyes are brought in to pick up a case that the Fall Guy turned down.
We'll take it.
Long story short, an innocent accountant discovers that his evil employers are engaged in embezzlement.
Mr. Durwood has learned too much, too easily.
Now his life is in danger.
Sounds good so far.
Yeah, but the story's just an excuse for some comedic misadventures. In one plot twist, our heroes are drugged with knockout drops.
I'll probably be up all night worrying about those computers.
Instead of killing the detectives, the bad guys relocate them to Pittsburgh. And if you find the word Pittsburgh funny, then this is the comedic caper for you.
Great steel mills, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh.
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 Yeah, Pittsburgh.
Two hookers who framed us in Pittsburgh.
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 And like the TV movie, the backdoor pilot features lots of driving. This time, they take it even further. The episode does something never before shown on prime time, a high-speed car chase with go-karts. See if you can spot the use of rear projection. Unlike most backdoor pilots, this episode gives screen time to the show's main character. We even get to see Colt working on a big Hollywood movie, and that's always a good thing, right? Oh no. Later, Colt washes off the makeup and saves his friends from being kidnapped.
That's right. We ain't taking off.
Colt redirects the jet in a big finish that is strangely similar to a scene from the movie Airplane. Then there's an epilogue where Brutus the dog gets the last laugh.
The old eyes in the back of the head. Something that took years.
Now, we've discussed that Glenn Larson was a very prolific writer. That's because he had a reputation for reusing scripts, even when it wasn't his script to begin with. Plagiarism is a very serious claim, but that was part of Glenn Larson's reputation. In Harlan Ellison's book about Star Trek, the author refers to Glenn Larson as Glenn Larceny. In 1978, the makers of Star Wars sued Universal Studios, claiming that Glenn Larson's Battlestar Galactica was infringing upon Star Wars copyrights.
From a certain point of view.
Larson was found not guilty. Maybe the judge recognized that Star Wars itself was borrowing heavily from the Seven Samurai and Flash Gordon. And in James Garner's memoir, The Garner Files, he includes this juicy anecdote. Glenn Larson stole a bunch of Rockford stories. He had the gall to lift the plots and just put different character names in them. When we caught him, we complained to the Writers Guild, and they fined him. And true story, it ends with Garner punching Larson. So given what we know about Glenn Larson's writing habits, here's one possibility. Glenn Larson wrote this episode under the assumption that Rooster would have gone to series, making it a nice crossover episode between two hit shows. Or Maybe it was intended as an episode of Rooster. But when the series didn't get picked up, Glenn Larson retooled the script as a backdoor pilot featuring the Fall Guy. The point is, if Glenn Larson had written some version of this thing, he wasn't going to let it go to waste. That would be like cooking a steak without getting to eat it. Did you notice that the steak is glued to the plate? In the end, How Do I Kill Thee is a unicorn among TV episodes, the backdoor pilot that reimagines characters from another pilot in hopes of getting them their own series. Which, didn't happen. After the episode aired, ABC said goodbye to Sweets and Rooster.
Goodbye, we've all come to say goodbye, goodbye.
At the Atomic Abe YouTube channel, we do our research about pop culture. But needless to say, there is very little written about this episode of The Fall Guy. In Paul Williams' book about maintaining sobriety, he does write about his relationship with God, but he doesn't include any anecdotes about why ABC passed on Rooster. So we don't have any official reasons for why the concept didn't go to series. We do know the backdoor pilot aired opposite the Facts of Life episode where Blair gets in trouble with the IRS.
I'm no tax expert, but people do go to jail for this.
So maybe that's what people were watching on December 1st, 1982 at 9 p.m. Eastern. Or it could just be that sometimes a supporting player isn't ready to star in their own TV show or movie, which makes Rooster the grandma's boy of its day. After the Rooster debacle, Paul Williams and Pat McCormick teamed up one more time for another Smokey and the Bandit.
I feel like the guest of honor at a crabs convention.
Fans will point out that they appeared in 3 of the movies, which is one more than Burt Reynolds did. However, Burt does appear in the 3rd film during Buford's hallucination sequence.
Hello, Buford.
But even Paul Williams and Pat McCormick didn't come back for the later sequels like Bandit Bandit and Beauty and the Bandit. These made-for-TV movies aired in the mid-90s as part of ABC's Action Pack. Not sure who was clamoring for these sequels. In that way, Beauty and the Bandit is like Top Cat Begins. Lee Majors went on to do 3 more seasons of The Fall Guy, and he later starred in a trilogy of reunion movies for the $6 Million Man, including one that tried to launch a new show about the Bionic Girl starring Sandra Bullock.
Nifty, huh?
Meanwhile, Glenn Larson attempted another spin-off during a 2-part episode of Knight Rider, which we'll cover on an upcoming installment of Behind the Backdoor Pilot.
It's something to admire.
In the meantime, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss a video, and why not check out some of our other entries about backdoor pilots, including a failed spin-off of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman starring a Robo-Dog.